Hello, fellow Rebel Capitalists. Hope you're well. So, we've got a lot to talk about today. First and foremost, this debate going back and forth with these gang members that were deported to El Salvador and taken straight to prison, as far as I can tell, indefinitely. And I just got done talking to Robert Barnes himself for about an hour. We did an interview. It's going to be up on the interview channel later on this week, where we really dive into the nuance as to not only what's going on with these gang members and if it's constitutionally legal and what Trump's doing and if he's breaking the Constitution, but we also get into the details as to what happened with this Turkish gal that is a PhD student at, I believe, Tufts University. So I'm going to be giving you kind of the Reader's Digest version of that right now today. And also, Treasury yields are tanking. Last time I checked, down about 8 basis points down the 10-year Treasury yield. So we're going to have to look at not only that, but what's happening with the 2-year Treasury yield to determine if it's going lower and lower and lower relative to the Fed funds rate, because you guys know from watching my videos, the Fed almost always follows the 2-year Treasury yield. So then we can determine if maybe the market is off sides right now as far as how many rate cuts they're predicting for 2025. And then more unintended consequences. We want to talk. We've been talking a lot about cars lately, but that's okay. It's applicable to most people. Cars and housing, I think the most applicable. But it looks like Mercedes might be backing out of the not the US market. Josh, change that for me, please. They're not backing out of the US market. They're backing out of the US market. That's my fault. And it might not be with their whole inventory, but at least kind of the cars at the lower end. And this makes sense because those are going to be the customers that are most price sensitive to increases due to the tariffs. All right. So first and foremost, let's get into the very contentious topic of what is going on with these gang members that were sent to, or alleged gang members that were sent to El Salvador. Josh, can you go ahead and pull up my Twitter feed, please? Okay, and then scroll down, and let's start with that one. Yeah, right there. Click on that. Okay, so if you guys haven't seen it, this the president of El Salvador tweeted this video that, I mean, I would strongly suggest watching it. It looks like a trailer for like a Jason Bourne movie. and I know we're watching it right now, but if you actually see it with the audio, it's got like a music bed and it's very it's over the top dramatic. And I watched this and I'm like, do we really need like an overproduced movie trailer to show that these guys are going to prison? I mean, it seems like propaganda. And I know the argument is, well, we have to do this to deter other gang members from coming to the United States. Really? Like, if these gang members are that bad, if they are the worst of the worst, whether it's MS-13 or, these are the people that are beheading other human beings. They're, child trafficking. They're doing they're doing all these terrible, terrible things. You really think they're going to be deterred from coming to the United States just because of some overproduced video that looks like it's from an intro to like a James Bond movie? I mean, come on. Who are we trying to kid? But that's not really my point. My point in bringing this up is going over how this is applicable to the Constitution, because at the end of the day, that really is one of the things that makes the United States exceptional. And the question is not whether or not these people should be deported. This is, and I think people are getting so emotional about this, that they're conflating two things. They're conflating deporting someone that is here illegally with sending someone that is here illegally to an El Salvadoran prison for the rest of their lives. Those two things are not the same. And they're not the same based on the Constitution, according to Robert Barnes, and they're not the same based on just the way the United States law is put into practice. So let's start by going over something that everyone brings up on this topic, and that is the Alien Enemy Act. I went and did some research on that, and I listened to a very thorough podcast, a breakdown of the Alien Enemy Act from, I believe it was the 10th Amendment Center. They did a great job. I want to give them a huge shout out. And the point they make, which is really, really good, is in order to trigger the Alien Enemy Act, Congress has to have a declaration of war. They have to have a declaration of war, not just on drugs or against terrorism or some, abstract, obscure thing, but they actually have to have a declaration of war against another sovereign nation. So we would have to have a declaration of war against Venezuela or against Mexico, as an example, in order to trigger this Alien Enemy Act. Now, that doesn't mean that Trump can't legally deport people that are here illegally into the United States. That he can do. And for the breakdown of how he can do that legally, you're going to have to watch the interview that I had with Robert Barnes, because he can go over that a lot better than I can. But the bottom line is, with these 17 gang members or alleged gang members, they have gone through a process in the United States to determine a couple different things. Number one, that they are here illegally. So this isn't necessarily something that's a legal right of someone who is here illegally. I'm talking about due process. But what is within their legal right is the opportunity to prove if they are here legally. So as an example, if someone comes up to George Gammon and says, "I don't like you, you are a terrorist, you are here illegally in the United States, therefore we are going to immediately deport you to an El Salvadorian prison." So they can't just do that. Right? What I would have the opportunity to do with the immigration officer is I would have the opportunity to show them my birth certificate. And then if I show them my birth certificate, then we're done here. We're done here, or the social security card, or whatever is valid proof. So going back to these gang members, according to Barnes, what happened is they went through that process and they could not prove that they were legally in the United States. So that's one discussion. Now, so therefore, should they or can they be legally deported based on the Constitution or based on the laws of the United States as they are put into practice today? Absolutely, 100%. 100%. But a completely separate question is, can we put them in prison without due process if they are illegally in the United States? The answer there is unequivocally no. We cannot do that. So in talking to Barnes and trying to think through what has happened here, his view, and I would assume that he's correct because he has massive amounts of experience in this, is it wasn't really the United States who put them into the El Salvadorian prison, although the way they're positioning this, the way they're presenting it, it really makes it seem like the United States is taking this tough stance on crime. And if you are a gang member in the United States, we're sending you straight to prison, buddy. But that's not technically what they did, according to Barnes. So what they did is they said, okay, we have the legal right to deport these people, and we should be deporting them back to Venezuela. But coincidentally, Venezuela, I don't know, they don't want to take them. So what are we supposed to do? Now, I don't buy this for a moment. Now, this is their argument. the government's argument or Trump's argument or the administration or whoever he hired. This is their argument. But I'm right here in Colombia. And remember a couple months ago when Colombia didn't want to take a plane full of Colombians that were illegally in the United States? What did Trump do? He got on the phone about 30 seconds later. And he said, Petro, you better take those people or else I'm going to do tariff or this and this and this and this and this and this. And what did Petro do? He said, okay, we'll take him. Now, I don't think Petro did that as a result of Trump's threats. I think he did that because a lot of people came to him and said, hey, by the way, what you're doing is completely unconstitutional based on the Colombian constitution. And if you want to definitely for sure not win another election, then just go ahead and don't take Colombian citizens back into Colombia. So I think that's really the motivation there. But my point is, why on earth is Trump so immediately getting on top of Petro for not taking Colombian citizens? But when it comes to Venezuela, it's like, well, I don't know. Maduro said he didn't want to take them. What are we going to do? You see, so this is, in my view, this is obviously intentional. Why is it intentional? Because if he sends them back to Venezuela, then who knows where it goes from there, right? And that would be following not only the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. So what they did is they're like, well, let's send them to El Salvador because we've got this good excuse over here that Maduro doesn't want to take them, because we've spoken to the president of El Salvador and we've got this. Now, we don't have anything in writing. We don't have anything that would incriminate us. But we've got this kind of wink, wink, nod, nod that if we just happen to maybe theoretically send some guys that are accused of being in a gang, I don't know, we just dropped them off at your border. I mean, maybe he's going to put him in prison, maybe not. It's outside of our control. When the government or whoever is doing it, they know damn well what's going to happen is the president's going to immediately put them in prison with no due process whatsoever. And that way, the American government or authorities or whatever, they're squeaky clean because they didn't put someone in prison without due process. No, we didn't do that. We just dropped them off at the border. Who could have known that they would have put them immediately in prison and that the president would have come out with this basically trailer to a James Bond movie showing how tough he is? I mean, this was all premeditated. Let's just be honest here, right? So the main takeaway is, did the Trump administration, did they do anything technically illegal? No, they didn't. Now, did they abide by the spirit of the law? Absolutely not. And I'm not going to sit here and say whether which is right or which is wrong. My opinion is, let me just put it to you this way. If they would have sent those people to Venezuela, I would be totally okay with this. Totally okay with this. But the fact that they sent them to El Salvador knowing that they would be locked up indefinitely without due process, I've got a problem with that. And I think that at the very least is against the spirit of the Constitution. And at the end of the day, and the reason I harp on this stuff so much is because if you grant the president or the Congress or whatever, the central planners, the politicians, if you grant them the power to do something that is unconstitutional just because you think it's going to expedite something that is good, I can assure you 100% that the next president is going to use that against you, or they're going to use that against someone that you want to be in the United States. So as an example, if what Trump had done was was unconstitutional. And, we say that's okay because he's getting around the law and this is a law that shouldn't be in the first place. And instead of actually changing the Constitution or amending the Constitution, what we're going to do is just kind of circumnavigate it just because it's quicker. And at the end of the day, we got to do something, right? We can't have these gang members around the United States. If that's the argument, then you also have to be in favor of Kamala Harris, assuming she's the next president, not only deporting, let's just say, someone who is here illegally, but let's just say someone that's here illegally because they overstayed their visa, right? Or maybe just someone that's here illegally outright. They crossed the border, whatever it is, right? And let's just say that they are, they have a blog and they are standing up for the Second Amendment because in the country they fled from and came to the United States, the reason they were persecuted, or according to what they believe, the reason the population was persecuted there is because the country did not have the Second Amendment. And let's say Kamala Harris doesn't like that. So then what would Kamala Harris do? Well, she's not only going to deport them, but she's going to just maybe drop them off at the border of a country that she's got this wink, wink, nod, nod agreement with that's going to put them in prison indefinitely, or at least till the end of her term, to where they're no longer kind of a political nuisance for her, right? So no one on the right would be against or would be for that, right? They might be for the deportation, but they wouldn't be for just putting someone in prison without the due process. So you see my point. I've got multiple points on this, but that's one of them. We've got to understand the precedents that it sets if you allow the government to do something that's unconstitutional, even if it's something that you like, right? It's like free speech. The definition of free speech is not allowing people to say whatever they want to say, so long as they don't offend you, or so long as they don't say something mean or say something you don't like. No. The definition of free speech is actually the opposite. It's allowing people to say things that are distasteful. It's allowing people to say things that may be offensive, that may be rude, that may be despicable. But that's what's protecting them. That's what makes the United States unique. And it's the exact same thing with the Constitution. And that's why I pound the table on this so often, is that's got to be our North Star. That's got to be the starting point. Because if we start doing things just expeditiously, just because it favors our narrative, whatever we believe should happen, then now all of a sudden we become a country of men and not a country of law. And then we lose something that makes the United States exceptional, right? So in summary, is do I agree? Do I morally agree with what the Trump administration is doing? No, I don't. And what I'm talking about is dropping those characters off in El Salvador without due process. Because now, let me be clear. Am I in favor of people who break the law or going to prison? Absolutely, I am. 100%. Look, if you're a gang member that comes here illegally, and forget if you're here illegally, that doesn't even matter. If you're an American citizen, for heaven's sakes, and you come in here and you murder someone and you go through due process and you're in prison, I am all in favor of that. In fact, I might even be in favor of sending them to an El Salvadorian prison. Right? So it's not that I want to protect gang members from going to prison. No, absolutely not. It's that I just want them to have due process, because we don't know if these 17 guys, we don't know if they're gang members. We don't know if they've committed a crime. Now you can say, oh, George, oh, look, the government has a lot of evidence. Great. The government had a lot of evidence that Donald Trump was a Russian spy or whatever. And we see how that turned out. You know, they had a lot of evidence that the J6 people were terrorists, or or just breaking the law and insurrectionists and all of these things. And that doesn't mean that they shouldn't have due process. And I understand that those people are American citizens. But you see what I'm saying is that the Constitution, whether you're an American citizen or not, and according to Barnes, it doesn't even matter if you're here illegally. That doesn't even that isn't even relevant. If you are in jeopardy of going to prison for something, then you have due process. Period. End of story. It's crystal clear on that, right? So my issue is these people being sent to prison without that due process, because you can sit there and assume that because they have brown skin and tattoos that they're part of this gang and they did something wrong. You don't know that. You don't know that. The only thing we know for sure is that they're in the United States illegally, and that should get them deported. Absolutely. But it shouldn't necessarily mean that they go to prison for the rest of their lives. You see, we can't just, it's just like communism back in the McCarthy days, right? That got completely out of hand. And we potentially could be going down that slippery slope right now, to the point where, I mean, look, you've got some Mexican guy, let's say, that lives in your neighborhood that's got some tattoos and you don't like him. Hey, yeah, gang member for sure. And let's say Trump says, oh, yeah, fine. Let's just take him and let's just put him in prison. Let's just put him in an El Salvadorian prison, right? We can't get to that point because, again, on a moral level, for sure, an ethical level, a legal level, but also just as importantly, because that is going to be used against you or someone you know and love. Because I can assure you, if it starts right here with just people that are illegals and getting around the due process thing, it's going to gradually morph into people that are here on a student visa or people that are here with a green card. And then it's gradually going to morph into now all of a sudden citizens. And we saw that with the Patriot Act. It's the exact same thing. So I am all in favor of locking up gang members once we prove that they're gang members and once we prove that they have done something that would justify locking them up. And we do that in a court of law, allowing them to defend themselves and prove that they are innocent. Right? But I am not in favor of doing that just because that we accuse them of something. Right? So hopefully that's clear. Now, as far as the gal that is the Turkish PhD student who, and if you're not clear on this story, what happened is she is in the country legally. So that would be different than the gang members right there. She's a student. She did an op-ed at her local paper or for the local school where she, was in favor of some of these Hamas positions, right? Standing up for Palestine, kind of anti-Israel. So what happened is Marco Rubio comes out and says, okay, we're just going to go ahead and effectively kidnap this gal. So she's just walking down the street and we've got like a black van show up with these guys in hooded masks that just take her right off the street in plain daylight. So I don't think that's a great look. And their argument is, well, although you are here legally, let's just say on a student visa, we don't like what you're doing. And therefore, you are a guest in our house, is how I think Marco Rubio presented it. You are a guest in our house. And hey, if we don't like something that you did, if you, misbehave, then we're going to kick you out of our house. And that's end of story. Okay, well, it's not really end of story because, again, what this falls back on is the Constitution giving people freedom of speech. Now, that First Amendment, that applies to non-citizens. It absolutely 100% does. And again, you've got to watch the conversation I had with Robert Barnes. where he tells you the history of this and goes over a lot of different cases that back this up. But the Supreme Court, through various decisions, determined that there is a hierarchy. Okay, so if you are a U.S. citizen, then you cannot be persecuted for saying something that the government doesn't like. But then the next step down is a green card holder. Now, if you're a green card holder, you have 99% of the latitude of a citizen. Now, if you're here on a student visa, you have a little less latitude. But in order to be deported for simply something that you said, the government has this laundry list of things that they actually have to prove. So in the example of the Turkish gal, the Turkish PhD student, there's an extremely low probability that this gal gets deported, because she does have some rights to free speech, and you can't just deport. It's not like Rubio was saying, where, oh, this person's a guest in my house, and if they look at me the wrong way, I can just kick them out. Not really. It's a better example would be you allow someone into your house and you sign a contract with them that they are allowed to stay in your extra bedroom, like an Airbnb or something, for a month. And you have a contract with them. So then if they say something you don't like, then you can't just kick them out after 2 or 3 days, assuming they haven't broken that contract, which in this case, just doing an op-ed and expressing your views on something just through speech wouldn't be something that would nullify that contract that essentially the United States government had with this Turkish gal. So that's how in practice it works. That's how the Constitution is set up, and that's what has been determined, or the way the Supreme Court has looked at the Constitution and how they have defined it and how they have defined the intent. So where do I fall on this? Well, I think, I don't really like what Trump did, because I think it's more of a political stunt. And I think it's a very bad argument that, just someone's in your house, so you can just kick them out at any time. That really doesn't hold up under scrutiny. But I think it's good in the sense that most likely this gal will get off, because the government really doesn't have any legal footing to stand on if the only thing this gal did was just be a part of a protest group that was in favor of Palestine, and if the only thing that she did is just express her views through speech in this op-ed. I just don't like the way this was done by the Trump administration, to where they come up in a black van with guys with masks and just grab some random person, or what looks from the public to be a random person just walking down the street with their cup of Starbucks. I mean, well, what are we doing here at the end of the day, right? What happened till I mean, if you want to take that approach, that you don't like what she said, fine, go ahead and just go through a process that's a little more civilized, let's say. Again, we're not dealing with a gal that's an MS gang member or MS-13 gang member, and we're not dealing with someone that is here illegally. Right? It's totally and completely different. So that's really what I have to say there. And regardless of what side of the argument you fall on, I mean, I totally get wanting to get rid of all the gang members and send them to prison. I totally get wanting to make the United States safe. I totally get the fact that we do have a problem in the United States. I'm completely sympathetic to that view. And I totally get the fact that there are these gang members that are doing a lot of things in the United States that are illegal. And we should do everything within the law to prevent this from happening in the future. But we can't circumnavigate the Constitution to do that. And in my view, that's really what the Trump administration is doing by just coincidentally dropping them off at the border of El Salvador. Okay. And I'm sure everyone's going to disagree. Very contentious for sure. But, look, if you don't like what I say, just unsubscribe. I mean, that's what you're going to get on this channel is me just being authentic and me just giving you my honest view. I'm not saying that I'm always right or I'm always wrong. But the one thing that you can count on is that I'm just going to be honest with you. And I'm not going to tell you what I think you want to hear. I'm going to tell you what I think you need to hear. And at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to get people to think, whether I piss them off, whether I agree with them, whatever it is. And I'm trying to get people to think. And hopefully by doing that, I'm getting more and more people to see the United States and our government and what they do through the lens of principles. All right, now let's get on to Treasury yields. Go over to the CNBC homepage so we can get a summary of this. And we've got...
You'll have to share your screen.
Okay. Oh, that's right. I forgot that we weren't. I was assuming that I was pulling up my Twitter feed there. Okay, there we go, guys. So actually, just let's see what happened in the Dow. Pretty mellow day. We've got the Dow basically flat, S&P, basically flat, NASDAQ up a bit, 150 points. So, but the VIX is still at 21.77, which is relatively high based on what we've seen over the past year or so. Bonds, this is what I want to focus on, guys. The 10-year Treasury down almost 9 basis points today. Why? According to CNBC, it's due to weak economic data. And let's remember that tomorrow is Liberation Day. So we're going to get an idea of what's happening or kind of we're going to get a more solid, definitive view as to how these tariffs are going to roll out. And I think what the market is doing is they're assuming that this is going to be, at least in the short run, it's going to be very disruptive and it's going to lead to a lot of uncertainty, which could possibly exacerbate the problems that we have currently in the United States economy. So we've got the United States economy that's fragile, let's say. And I think what the 10-year Treasury is telling us is that the bond market is betting that whatever it is that Trump's doing, that's not really the whole entire cause of a recession, but there's a high probability that could be the straw that really breaks the camel's back. That could be the catalyst. That could be something that kind of takes us over the edge from having small economic growth to being in an actual contraction. And then maybe the unemployment rate goes up and maybe you get that official recession based on the NBER coming out and announcing it. Okay, so Treasury yields fall. Okay, we got that. So the Treasury market digesting some of the weak economic data. When you combine that with Trump's tariff policies, I agree with that. Where I don't agree with the mainstream media is they like to pin everything on the tariffs. And I mean, look, the tariffs aren't making anything better, but I don't think that's the main reason why, or if we go into recession. I don't think that's, you can't just point to the tariffs and say that's, if it wasn't for these tariffs, the economy would have continued to boom. I think that's totally unfair. So the 10-year Treasury, okay, down 4.16. What I'm most interested in is where the 2-year Treasury is, and that's down at 3.875. So let's go over, hopefully I've got this pulled up here. So you got the Fed funds rate. Let's see if we've got, I think this is it. Hopefully, yes, this is it. Okay, so we've got the Fed funds rate, which is in red, and we've got the 2-year Treasury, which is in blue. And if we zoom out, you can see, and we could go to the max view as well. But the Fed almost always follows the 2-year Treasury. The 2-year Treasury goes first, and then the Fed kind of catches up. And it's not just on a cutting cycle, it's on a hiking cycle as well, which you can see right here during the cerveza sickness. So what's happening now is the Fed is pausing and they're going to take this hawkish stance. It's, higher for longer and all these things. We've got to get down inflation. When the 2-year Treasury yield is pretty much going straight down. So let's go back to that 1-year view. And now this delta can become quite extreme, which you can see right here when there was a spread of, what were we here, 5.3, call it. And look at the 2-year Treasury was down almost at 3.4. Wow. So you almost had a 200 basis point spread. So this spread can get a lot more extreme. But what happened at the end of the day is the Fed funds came down to meet the 2-year Treasury. Granted, the 2-year Treasury also kind of went up to meet Fed funds. But now it's going in the opposite direction, and we're down at 3.87. Fed funds at 4.3. So that's it. Let's just call it 2 rate cuts of 25 basis points. That's being priced into the 2-year right now. So let's see where we are as far as the market predicting. I think that is the CME. Let's go to that. Fed Watch, yeah. So right now there's only an 8.2% chance the Fed cuts, and that would be in 35 days. I don't know. I mean, I don't think, I wouldn't say it's like a 70% chance that they pause, but is it a 91% chance? Yeah, I don't know. I would, maybe 80, something like that. But now let's go out to the next meeting. How do we do that? So we're at, okay, April 26th, June, March. Oh, I see. So we're at May right now. So we got June. Let's go July. Okay, this makes more sense. So now July, we're all the way up to a 58.7% chance that they cut by basically 25. What's interesting is there's a 24% chance that we're going to be down at 3.75 when there's a 91% chance that the next meeting that they're not going to cut. So that would lead you to believe that the market is kind of leaning towards or closer to maybe even a 50 basis point cut for the July meeting. So it's market is pretty much seeing or reflecting, or the odds based on Fed Watch with the CME group, basically reflecting exactly what we're seeing in the 2-year Treasury yield. So what I really want to watch for is something like this, where the 2-year really goes down, and that would lead me to believe that the probabilities increase substantially, that the market is pricing in not just 2 rate cuts for 2025, but potentially 3, 4, who knows, maybe even more. And remember, why am I trying to focus so much on what the Fed is going to do? So it's not really because I think the Fed matters too much. I think they're responding to what's happened. And I don't think if they drop rates, it's going to be stimulative on net balance or any of these things that you hear in the mainstream media. But I do believe if the Fed is cutting by, let's say 4 times, so they're cutting by 1% or they're cutting 2% in 2025, that tells you pretty much everything you need to know about the economy. If the Fed cuts by 200 basis points, let's say in 2025, that does not mean that the economy is going to be doing well because they cut by 200 basis points. That means that the economy is in the toilet because they had to cut by 200 basis points. It's all about your framework and how you see the and how you interpret exactly what the Fed rate cuts mean. Okay, now let's go over Mercedes. Yep, this is another one here where I want to, and I know this is unpopular, probably just as unpopular as my take about the Constitution and gang members and everything. But at the sake or at the risk of pissing people off, again, sorry guys, this is just what you signed up for when you tuned into one of my videos. I want to encourage people to look at these tariffs through the lens of one question. And that question is, does this increase the amount of goods or services in the United States? Not does this increase the amount of goods and services produced in the United States, but does this increase the amount of goods and services in the United States? Because at the end of the day, this is wealth. And a lot of people get this confused because they, oh, George, we don't need to consume anything more. You're talking about this consumerism that we need more goods and services. You're missing the point there. You're went straight over the head if that's your view. What I'm saying is if we want to accrue the maximum benefit to the poor and middle class, if we want to increase the standard of living, if we want to benefit society at large, we have to have more goods and services, not because I think people need more stuff. That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is that if you have more stuff in the economy, then in a free market, prices are going to go down. But it's very unprobable that nominal wages go down. So what you have, in effect, is the purchasing power of the poor and middle class in society at large increasing. So what does that mean? If your purchasing power is increasing, then that means you can take more time off. Or you can work hard and increase your purchasing power even further. That means you have much more control over your destiny. That means we improve the standard of living because it gives people time to go solve other problems because they're not so fixated on how they're going to put a roof over their head or food on the table. Right? These are all fringe benefits. These are all knock-on effects, positive knock-on effects of having more stuff. It's not the more stuff necessarily, but it's the fact that the more stuff leads to lower prices, which while at the same time in a free market would lead to nominal wages going up, which would lead to an increase in purchasing power. And that increase in purchasing power at the end of the day is what makes us all better off as a society. So getting back to this article on Mercedes. Where were you? Right here. Mercedes weighs pulling U.S. entry-level cars over tariffs. And so I've heard some back and forth. I've heard some people say, they're not going to do it. And I've heard people say, oh, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. And I don't know whether or not they're going to do it, but it does make a lot of sense to me that if you're selling a 30 or 40,000, I don't know what their entry-level car is, but let's just say it's 50 grand. If you're selling a car at a 50 grand price point, that consumer is going to be far more sensitive to the price going up by $5,000 to $10,000, let's say. Whereas if you're selling a $200,000 car and the price goes up by 20, 30 grand, that person is whatever. They're dropping 20 grand on their next bar tab or whatever it is. So they don't really care. So if I'm Mercedes, to me, this makes sense. So then I can allocate those cars that are being produced to other markets and hopefully sell more there and take more market share. But getting back to this article, Mercedes Group is considering withdrawing its least expensive cars from the U.S. because of the tariffs. German automakers mulling cutting sales of more entry-level models like small GLA sport utility vehicle as part of a broader tariff contingency plan that people said declining to be identified because the deliberations are private. Okay. Mercedes hasn't made a final decision. Okay. Mercedes aims to maximize sales in the United States, obviously. Mercedes is among manufacturers navigating the worsening trade war that risks hurting sales and disrupting global supply chains. Okay, we get it. For models like GLA, they start on 43. I saw as close with 50 grand. Mercedes has been pushing further upmarket, directing resources to its most expensive models, such as the S-Class sedan. Yeah. This all is probably exactly what I'd be doing if I was the CEO of Mercedes. So then we have to ask ourselves, as a result of this, are we going to have more or less stuff here? We're going to have fewer or greater goods and services. The answer is, especially over the short term, we're going to have fewer. We're going to have fewer. And you can say, hey, well, that's going to be great because we're going to bring that manufacturing back to the United States. That's going to create manufacturing jobs and blah, blah, blah. You may be right, but that's a benefit. The question becomes, at what cost? And I'm not necessarily just talking about the cost of increased Mercedes. I'm talking about the cost to society at large as far as having less stuff. You see? And you say, well, it's no big deal with cars. We don't need any more new cars. Okay, great. But these tariffs, I'm just using this as an example, right? We have to look at the tariffs and how do they apply to the stuff that you buy at Walmart? How do they apply to the stuff you get at Target, at Home Depot? And you just go down this laundry list. And at least over the short run, I don't see how this doesn't lead to having fewer goods and services in the United States. And that's not going to increase your purchasing power. That's just going to mean you have access to less stuff, and the stuff that you do have access to goes up in price. So you're paying the same prices, maybe even higher prices for fewer options. And at the end of the day, that hurts Americans, the same Americans that might be benefiting from getting that quote unquote manufacturing job. So I think, what's the answer here? In my view, it's just to reduce the regulations and the bureaucracy and the red tape that is preventing our companies in the United States from competing at the highest level, or might not be preventing them, but is getting in their way. It's a ball and chain. Let's just give them every single advantage we possibly can without making their competitors worse, right? Let's give them every single competitive advantage we can within the context of free market capitalism. That's how we win. We don't win with more central planning, right? We don't win with more taxes. We win with more free markets. And this is what unshackles the American entrepreneur to do what they do best. And I do think that the American entrepreneur is exceptional. And I do think that even if Mercedes or whatever, China, BYD, even if they do have XYZ advantage because of their government intervention, I would still take an American entrepreneur unshackled by bureaucracy, red tape, and regulations against that Chinese producer that at the end of the day has to deal with communism, at the end of the day has to deal with Xi Jinping and has to deal with their centralized government, even though they might have the advantage of, let's say, lower labor or a devalued yuan. Okay, guys, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. As always, make sure you are standing up for freedom, liberty, free market, capitalism. We'll see you on the next video.